The very early hours of the morning, or late at night depending on how you look at it, of September 22nd, 1993, an Amtrak train, known as the Sunset Limited, departed the station at Mobile, Alabama, to continue on its long-distance route. The Sunset Limited has a pretty rich history. It wasn't even originally operated by Amtrak, but by Southern Pacific. It is, in fact, the oldest named passenger train in the United States, and dates all the way back to 1894. It was traveling eastbound across Alabama, coming all the way from Los Angeles to a final stop scheduled in Miami, Florida. The train consisted of 7 different passenger cars, as well as a luggage car, and it was pulled by 3 diesel locomotives. Leading the train was a General Electric Genesis P40DC, number 819. These diesel-electric locomotives were brand new at the time, and were a big push by Amtrak to modernize their fleet of aging diesels. And 819 really was brand new. She was only 3 months old, and had been in active service for just 20 days. She was assisted by the locomotives she was set to replace, 2 EMD F40PHs, numbered 262 and 312. These engines dated back quite a ways, but were easily some of the best diesels Amtrak ever used, becoming their workhorses for multiple decades. But by the 90s, they were getting old. However, they were still capable of reaching 103 miles per hour, meaning that they wouldn't hold back a modern Genesis unit. The train had a total of 220 people on board. That included the crew. Since this was a long-distance train, it offered pretty fancy accommodations that were more reminiscent of classic passenger trains, such as food service. They had cooks, waitress staff, their manager, who's called a chief, as well as coach attendants, plus the 2 conductors, who were effectively the bosses of everybody on the train, as well as 3 engineers that drove the train. The conductors' names were Gary Farmer and D.K. Thompson, while the locomotive engineers were Billy R. Hall, Ernest L. Russ, and Mike D. Vinay, and they departed Mobile at 2:33 a.m., heading to their next stop in Pensacola. And there really was nothing going on the train that would indicate anything was amiss. The conductors even chatted about how smooth their night was going up until that point. And Engineer Hall even called Conductor Gary on the radio to thank him for bringing up coffee and cake while they were stopped at Mobile. Gary would reply, indicating a clear signal at Canot, meaning there was no reason for the train to proceed with caution or to even slow down. They rocketed forward at about 72 miles per hour, approaching a bridge known as the Big Bayou Canot Bridge. The bridge itself was pretty old, but for one thing wasn't even owned by Amtrak, it was owned by CSX. Much heavier freight trains passed over it all the time, and there were no issues, so there was no reason for the crew of the Sunset Limited to suspect anything could possibly go wrong. Clear signal, and smooth operations, they continued on their journey. It's hard to say what the 3 engineers on board would have thought as the lead engine suddenly struck the bridge, causing it to collapse.
Passenger train, I got people in the water, I got cars on fire.
Okay.
It's a derailment.
Okay, a derailment, but is it in Purchase there by Chickasaw Creek?
No, it's on the river.
On the Mobile
You
River?
can't get to it over the road. You need all the emergency vehicles that you can get to.
Okay, you got a derailment with people in the water.
That's right. Go on.
911.
Yes, listen, this is Amtrak train supervisor. We're on the Mobile River. The bridge is going out. We got cars burning, people in the river. Can't swim. We need help. Any kind of help you can get down
Okay,
here.
sir, stay on the line with me, sir.
Yes.
Okay, you with the Amtrak train?
Yes, ma'am. I'm the supervisor on board. We're on the Mobile River.
You on the Mobile River?
On the Mobile River. We got cars burning. They're over the bridges out. There's people in the water. We're trying to help them, but we need all kind of help. Yes, ma'am. We need help. Trying to help. Please.
Okay, which bridge is this?
Ma'am, I don't know. We're on the Mobile River.
You're on
That's
the
all I
Mobile River,
know.
but you don't know which bridge
No,
it is?
ma'am. No, ma'am. I haven't been informed by the conductor. John! John!
Okay, sir.
Yes,
Can you
ma'am.
give me some information on where this train was coming from?
It's coming from New Orleans, sir.
New Orleans?
Careful, watch your step. It's left New Orleans. Ma'am, I have to go and assist these folks.
Okay, sir.
The accident occurred at 2:53 a.m. with the lead engine number 819 embedding herself nose first into the canal bank. Her fellow engines, number 262 and 312, fell directly into the water below, followed by the baggage car, the sleeper car, and 2 of the passenger cars. The fuel tanks from the locomotives punctured on impact, causing diesel fuel to spill out and sparking a fire. Though both conductors, Gary and DK, did survive, but were incredibly confused and bewildered by the situation. They immediately fell back on their training, evacuating as many people as they could and doing their best to control what was, in effect, complete chaos. They were able to get the uninjured off the bridge because they weren't sure if it was going to continue collapsing, and then Gary would proceed to attempt to swim out to some of the stricken passenger cars in the water, but they sank beyond his means to do anything. They had also attempted to contact their fellow railwaymen, the engineers, but never got a response, called for help from the authorities, who descended upon the area and attempted to initiate rescue efforts. There were also plenty of civilian boats that showed up to help pull survivors out of the water, but rescue was difficult. It was a swamp, quite literally, and the only ways to access the area were either by boat or by rail. Rail was obviously out of the question, so boat it was. Between the fire and local wildlife, because that's alligator country, they had to be extremely cautious with how they approached the situation. And in the end, 47 people would die. 103 were injured. To date, it is Amtrak's worst rail disaster. But I bet you're wondering, wait, what the heck just happened? Why did the train even derail? Why did the bridge collapse? Why any of this? It doesn't make any sense. Was there something wrong with the bridge? Well, no, but also yes. Okay, here's the thing. At first, the investigators thought the bridge had in fact collapsed, that this was some kind of issue with its engineering or its age or something like that. But upon further inspection, that isn't what happened. The bridge's design was a part of the problem, because the span in question had been designed to swing initially, but had never actually done so, nor had it been secured properly once it was decided not to do that. This is relevant because just prior to the accident, one of the boats that was on scene helping rescue survivors, named the Vauvilla, well, she was on scene immediately. And there was a reason for that. Vauvilla was a towboat owned by the company Warrior and Gulf Navigation. The crew consisted of a Captain Stabler, as well as the pilot, Willie Odom, and 2 other crew members. The captain himself wasn't on duty at the time. He had turned in for the night, leaving Willie in charge, and he was piloting the ship, which was pushing 6 barges, and 2 rows of 3 barges each, that were loaded with coal and raw iron, down the Mobile River. But there was heavy fog in the area, and Odom was having trouble navigating. He'd never been properly trained on how to read his radar, and eventually guided the ship and the barges completely off course, out of the Mobile River and into the Big Bayou Canot. The canoe was normally closed to commercial boat traffic. There was no reason for them to be there, and they had no business being there. But Odom didn't realize where he was. He thought he was still in the river. He started looking for a place to tie up and wait for the fog to clear, but this never would happen, and he did recognize there was something on the radar. He thought it was another tugboat, so he moved to the side to allow it to pass, not realizing it wasn't a tugboat at all. It was the bridge. A bridge he didn't expect to be there, because there wasn't a bridge in that area of the Mobile River. But there was one in the canoe. The Mobilla struck the bridge at roughly 2:45 a.m. Because that span had been designed to rotate, the impact didn't cause it to collapse, but move slightly, roughly 3 feet out of alignment. Just a few minutes later, the Sunset Limited came through, and the accident took place. But weren't there methods for them to know that there was damage to the bridge? Shouldn't there be sensors or something? Well, yes, there were. The track circuit. It's effectively a wire that runs through the rails, and it's a method for making sure that the rails are in fact intact and therefore safe to cross. If those circuits break for any reason, it immediately causes the nearby signals to read danger, i.e. stop. And had that occurred, the Sunset Limited probably still would have crashed. It's hard to say if they had been able to stop in time, but they definitely would have been going a heck of a lot more slowly, meaning the crash would likely have been far less severe. However, the circuit didn't break. and I bet you're wondering why. Well, it's because the impact on the bridge didn't actually break the rail. It moved the bridge, and it kinked the rail. That rail had been welded together, and that's good because it is more secure, but it meant that it bent. It didn't actually snap, meaning the circuit remained intact. So as far as it was concerned, the track was totally fine, even though it was bent completely out of alignment, and a train even going quite slowly would have absolutely careened off the rails, let alone one traveling at 72 miles per hour. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, obviously went into great detail to figure out all the causes of this particular crash. The primary one was obviously the friggin' boat, but Odom himself nor his captain were held directly responsible. This is because, well, for one thing, it was just an accident, and it wasn't Odom's fault that he'd never been trained properly on the frickin' radar. On top of that, the boat didn't even have a compass or a chart of the waters around them. It didn't have the basic tools, only the radar, and Odom couldn't really read it. Now, at the time, it was completely legal for a boat to operate in complete darkness and fog with no maps or compass. That sounds rock stupid, but there was no legal issue there at the time. Changes were immediately made, making it mandatory for all boats wanting to use the Mobile River to have radar, maps, and a compass on board. It was also made illegal to give control of a vessel to a person not sufficiently trained on the uses of radar, as in the case of Odom. Charges were initially filed against him, but they didn't stick. He was not held criminally liable, and it's easy to see why. It wasn't his fault, exactly. He was basically set up to fail because of the way the standards of the time were. And it was an accident. He didn't do it on purpose. And according to most who knew him, including one of the conductors, Gary Farmer, Odom was a broken man after the crash. And even they, over time, didn't really see him as the villain of the story, given that it was just that, an accident. And he would have to live with the guilt of that accident for the rest of his life. But Amtrak and CSX weren't necessarily blameless either. For one thing, emergency responders were significantly hampered by Amtrak when it came to rescuing people. Not on purpose or directly, but because Amtrak didn't actually keep proper records of their passengers on board each train. Meaning that when emergency responders asked them how many people they were supposed to be looking for, and who they were, Amtrak was like, "We don't know." What do you mean you don't know? That's like basic stuff, guys, come on! As a result of the crash, Amtrak started keeping their passenger records electronically, meaning that, in case of such a situation, they would have clear, organized records to give to emergency responders immediately. Also, there was the issue of the bridge, because yes, the boat did hit it, and yes, that was the primary cause, but the bridge's design and age were called into question. That, and the fact that there were no warning lights attached to it at all. It was a much older design that hadn't been updated. CSX was scrutinized for this as it was their bridge, and if it wasn't an Amtrak, it could have been one of their trains heading off into oblivion. It was a ridiculous oversight by them, and the bridge was rebuilt, this time of much sturdier construction, no longer designed to turn, and with warning lights installed. The warning lights are the big thing here, because originally it didn't have any. They just thought it didn't need them because boats weren't even supposed to be there. That's true, but what if one got lost? Like this one did. Yeah? If there had been any amount of warning lights on the bridge, Odom would have known that there was something there, and he never would have hit it. It's kind of alarming to think that a simple light installation, costing a minimum amount of electricity, and a bulb that likely only cost a few dollars, could have saved 47 lives just by existing. But as I say, safety policy all over the world is often written in blood. Till next time, this is Darkness, an individual of fun. Farewell.